Thank you, everyone, for coming in. And thank you, Simon. I've been really looking forward to this Substack Live. For folks who are just tuning in, I'm here with Simon Rosenberg, the political strategist and the author behind the Substack, the Hopium Chronicles.
Yeah.
He has a new post out today called Double Tacos, Dropped Papers and Declining Poll Numbers, Monty Python or an American President. Quite recently, he had a post, Trump is weak, not strong. We're going to talk about that too. But I want to start things off, Simon, with
Yeah.
the No Kings protest.
Yeah.
I was in Nashville when that was happening, saw the huge attendance near the state capitol there. Wondering what your impressions were about the No Kings protest, how millions of people estimated showing up across the country, thousands of different protests. Uh, Your thoughts in a kind of post-mortem of this
Yeah.
particular protest?
Well, I think one is the contrast between now the many months of millions and millions of people going out and holding peaceful protests and expressing their displeasure and disapproval of this administration, and how also joyful they've been, right? How festive they've been, what a celebration of democracy they've really become. The contrast between that kind of embrace of our democratic traditions, the celebration of our democratic traditions, the kind of very de Tocquevillian bottom up kind of nature of these protests is such an unbelievably bright and powerful contrast to every day what's coming out of our wannabe mad dictator, Donald Trump. And I think that for the American people and many people in the Hopium community and people watching today have probably participated in these celebrations. I almost don't feel like they are protests. Like I almost feel like we need a different word for them because they don't. It was to me, I called it a celebration. Was the line I used at Hopium. Is that I think this is a really kind of profound thing that's happening. Is that people. I think some of this is like this is the first big kind of in public thing people have done after COVID, and like people are going back out into the world and reconnecting physically with people, not digitally and over the, not like this, right, with people. And there's a joy in this that I think we cannot overlook, that I think is actually central to everything that's happening. These are not bitter and angry protests. These are not, there hasn't been, violence and mayhem at these things. They've been given the size and scope and scale, and given how disaggregated they are, and that there really isn't anyone running any of this, right? I mean, this is kind of a very kind of spontaneous, locally organized thing. The size and scale and peaceful nature and how well they've been executed is really it's a miracle. And I give a lot of credit to Indivisible and the other kind of national instigators. I won't call them organizers because they almost sort of encouraged all this to happen and through their will, and then the American people have risen up. And I think the final point I'll make is that I've said this oftentimes, that people, you'll often hear, well, where's the Washington Democratic Party and where are our leaders right now? In an interesting way, I think the fact that all of this has happened without strong top-down leadership coming from Washington, that this isn't being organized by Schumer and Jeffries and the DNC, is actually may make all of this more sustainable and powerful because people feel local ownership over this, that they've created it. They aren't doing it because they were told. They're doing it because it was the right thing to do and it was self-organized. And so I'm very encouraged by this. And I think, but it's also only one piece of what has to happen, and we have to keep that in mind at all times.
Right. And I think your point about the demonstrations, the celebrations, being joyful. Such a good point. I am usually in New York. I went down to Nashville, Tennessee to cover the Kilmar Abrego Garcia hearings recently. And that was why I was there for the protests. And while I was the celebrations, if you will, when I was taking a car there, I remember one driver, very skeptical of them, saying, oh, they're not going to tolerate them here like they do in New York City. And when I was there, he could not have been more wrong. There
Right.
was just there was just a cheer celebration. It was in front of a big amphitheater is where it began, and the kind of signs that were available. So I just wanted to underline your point there. And there was a contrast. This was, at least in part, a reaction to Trump's military parade held on that day seemed to get a pretty meager attendance. Want
Yeah.
to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I live in Washington, and my middle son has an apartment that was literally, he's at GW, and he is literally was on the edge of the zone, right? And I know the area. I mean, there were very, very few people there.
Mm.
And look, the I think some of this had to do with, this was kind of a crazy event, and it was also in the evening and not during the day. But basically nobody showed up at this thing, and again, which is hard because the number of people that had relatives that were probably in the parade who came here from, not to see Trump and not to honor Trump, but because they had a cousin or a son or a daughter marching in the parade, given this number of people that participated, just you would have assumed there would have been a much bigger audience. But, look, I live in DC. We weren't invited to come. There wasn't sort of a major effort to get us to just regular people, because I think Trump, like everything he does, he views this as a tribal event, right? That it is invitation only for his supporters and his adherents and the people that love him, the adulation. It's all about this adulation. So this wasn't meant for the public. He doesn't really operate just like he over the weekend. And I also want to say I'm very grateful for all the coverage you've been doing, and for your diving into very tough issues, helping explain them in a time where we're all trying to figure this all out. But I mean, even the wild tweet or truth that he did on Sunday about redirecting the immigration enforcement towards Democrats, right,
Right.
was another manifestation of, like, he was going to, at that point on Sunday, he was going to insulate red areas and red interests from the immigration enforcement because he had gotten pushback from Republicans about how much damage this was doing to their economy, to their businesses, to their way of life. So his initial instinct, of course, because he's a tribal politician, was to protect the tribe and to punish us, right? And that was sort of what happened in the first, I called it double taco today, is that's what happened in the first kind of retreat from his immigration enforcement strategy, which was not only proving to be harmful to his tribe, but also was deeply unpopular. I mean, he's gone very negative now on immigration and deportations very rapidly because he overreached and they kind of wildly overreacted. But then, of course, he did another taco, right? He did another retreat, right, today, where they walk back the protecting of the tribe. And now where Stephen Miller prevailed, obviously, internally, and they're going to go back and go after everybody. And we may not have time to really go into, I'm an immigration expert, and we may not have time to go into all the details of this today, but this is a stunning kind of reversal that it just speaks to the chaos and the panic, I think, that's going on inside an administration that I think is failing, and that they're not achieving their significant objectives, and that their poll numbers are going way down. He's being rejected on his, Elon, whacked him a couple weeks ago, which was, I think, harmful to his narcissistic, ego. And he had, he's now, and so they are panicking and struggling and reversing course. They reverse course and not signing the document. And the G7, he left the G7 early, right? Like, it's just total chaos right now. And I think that they're in trouble. I think politically they are struggling, failing, and there isn't kind of an easy Trumpian way out, right? He can't hit a switch and have everything change. And the truth is, governing is a lot harder than running around the country for 3.5 years and promising all sorts of shit you were never going to do. And now the reality of, the struggle that he's under as president to achieve what he wanted to achieve, in the sense that he's weak, not strong, a loser, not a winner, that he's a big blubbery baby man and not a strong man, that all of these things are becoming equally as true as the roided up version that we get of Trump, from the right-wing noise machine every day. And so, we're seeing this sort of competing reality now emerge that is being believed and understood and at least entertained by more and more Americans.
Right. And you mentioned the double taco on immigration. I want to draw viewers' attention to what you wrote on the post. You noted that he first said he was going to exempt farm workers and hotel workers from these raids, and then he reversed himself once he learned it was politically unpopular. I want to point out a different taco that came out and hasn't really been described as that. But the entire fact that there was a hearing recently in Nashville, Tennessee for Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Let's not
Right.
lose sight of the fact that just weeks before the unsealing of his indictment, you had Kristi Noem saying in Congress that he would never, ever go return back. So that was a reversal there. There was another reversal days earlier with a gay asylum seeker who was facing persecution in Guatemala. He was brought back by court order. So this is a reversal, this sort of chest thumping, I'm not going to obey the courts. That I think in the sort of conversation that ensued about Kilmar Abrego Garcia in particular, the charges obviously got a lot of attention. But the reversal seems like it should also get a little recognition. What are your thoughts on his
Yeah.
reverses on that?
Well, listen, I interviewed Chris Van Hollen yesterday, who was the champion of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and was instrumental in getting him to return. And I think that one of the things that is, and you know this better than anybody, I mean, you know that these charges that they invented, in essence, right, in order to make it look like it wasn't a total taco, right, where he was actually going to be free and be able to talk to the media, that they needed to incarcerate him. They needed to keep him off the streets. They needed to criminalize him, right? Because what we know from the polling about what's happening with immigration is that the American people do not want non-criminal migrants deported from the country, right? That part of what's going on right now in the polling here is that this is starting to appear deeply inhumane and like a huge overreach. But where there's sympathy for the Trump administration is when people believe that they're getting rid of is what they call criminal aliens, right? So what they're doing, and you're going to encounter this if you're going to continue to report on this, is that they have to label everybody a criminal. And even one of the tactics they've used is that physical presence here and being undocumented. The reason we call it undocumented and not illegals is that it's not actually a crime to be undocumented in the United States.
Right.
It is, you are undocumented, and then you go through a legal process of removal or you stay, but it's not a crime. And what they've asserted is they've asserted now that the 10 to 15 million undocumented immigrants that are in the country are all criminals. That they've made this assertion that they've broken laws, that they're criminals, that they're illegals, right? To use this term, this incredibly inaccurate slur against 10 to 15 million people who pay their taxes, our kids go to school, they show up for work every day. Because as you know from reporting on this, immigrants to the United States, including undocumented immigrants, their crime rate is about half of what it is for native-born Americans. And it's also a lot lower than the crime rate of the guy in the Oval Office, right? And so this attempt that they're always going to do rhetorically is that it's necessary for them to keep the false impression that what they're doing is pursuing illegal lawbreakers as opposed to hardworking, innocent members of families or people that run businesses. And where this is really going to come to a head, and I did a big event on this last week, is that what they've done in South Florida, right, is that by removing the TPS, the temporary protected status, from about 1 million Cubans and Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians, that all of a sudden there are 1 million people who came here legally, right, that had their kids in school, that had work permits, who are now cannot work here. They are no longer allowed to be here. They can't go home. And we have 1 million people who basically are about to become, over the next few months, stateless. And it's going to create a humanitarian crisis in South Florida because there is no way for them to earn a living legally, right? They can't go back to their home countries because of the conditions there, and you're starting to see significant breaks in the Cuban community and some of the most ardent Trump supporters in South Florida, are starting to break from the Trump administration on on his inhumane. I mean, the woman who founded Latinas for Trump, a national organization, is a state senator in South Florida, just came out and viciously attacked the administration and said the conditions and what they're doing to Cubans is unacceptable and inhumane. And so there is there is Adam, there is a legitimate and serious backlash in the public to this wild immigration escalation and the inhumanity that we're witnessing in front of our eyes. And we should all be heartened by that, right? We should be heartened that the American people's sort of basic compass is want to treat people, because these are not illegals, these are not undocumented, these are not immigrants or migrants, they're people, right? And the sort of all the language we have around this is sort of dehumanizing them so significantly. These are people with families and brothers and sisters and kids in school, and they pay taxes, and they're being treated, like cattle. And it is the American people are not for it, and they've rejected this. And Trump's numbers, Trump just had the worst week of polling of this whole presidency. And I think in part because there's a sense that he's just gone way too far, and this isn't what they thought they were voting for last year.
Right. I want to underline one of the points that you made about the support mostly being for those who commit crimes, and turns to something that came out during the hearing last week with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It's predicated mostly on the cooperation of two people who were incarcerated for crimes. And these two cooperating witnesses, we found out during the hearing, have received breaks on their sentencing. One of them was moved to a halfway house, and both of them got help with their immigration for cooperating against Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who has not been convicted of anything and is presumed innocent of the crimes charged until proven guilty. And the judge appeared very skeptical of that evidence. That was my impressions and the impressions of many other journalists who I saw there that day in court. So to your point, it's ironic that in order to kind of tar Kilmar Abrego Garcia with these charges, they are recruiting the help of two people convicted of crimes and who are alleged to be the masterminds of this alleged conspiracy. So I wanted to throw that out there before turning to the next topic, the G7. You wrote a lot in your latest post about the G7 and Trump's potential ambitions to turn it into the G8, the G9 with America's longtime adversaries. Can you talk about his performance at the G7 during a time of war?
Yeah, listen, I mean, it was comical yesterday. I mean, we have to, I think it is really important for us to have this other way of looking at Trump, right? Which is that he's a buffoon and a clown, and that he's, looking more increasingly like, a buffoon. Hold on, let me just close my door. The and that and what happened at the G7 yesterday, he arrived late. I mean, this was an event that he was not going to want to go to, because basically it was going to be an unpleasant event for him, because the G7 rejects basically everything he's trying to do, and it was going to be always uncomfortable. He had a meeting with Zelensky, which he didn't want to do. And so, first of all, he showed up late, and so the whole schedule got all screwed up yesterday, right? And then he announced, we've seen the video this morning that I had not seen. I had just seen a picture since I posted this morning. There's a video of him taking this so-called trade agreement that he cut with the UK. He opens up the binder to show everybody, like he does in the White House, where he takes his binder and he opens it up, and there were papers inside, and they flew all over the place. And these were signed documents, right? And of course, he doesn't try to go get them. Keir Starmer runs around and collects the paper, but then he says, "This is my trade agreement with the European Union," and it was with the United Kingdom, right? And it's not clear that he knew the difference. And then last night he announced that he was leaving suddenly, early, to go attend to the war, basically to go deal with the escalation of what's happening in Iran right now. He refused to sign a joint communique, and then late last night they reversed their position again, right? Like this sort of ongoing incredible chaos. And they signed this communique, which they apparently negotiated late into the night with our G7 partners. But it just was, and then he tweeted out last night to the people of Iran that you need to evacuate a city of 10 million people, just and which helped apparently forge some degree of people abandoning Tehran last night. So it was just a day of just unbelievable chaos and buffoonery and disappointment for him. I mean, if you look at, I really want to stick on this idea that this guy is failing, right? Is that he told us he was going to cut a deal in with Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours. That hasn't happened. He said he was going to bring peace to the Middle East. That hasn't happened. He said he was going to, resolve the Gaza issue. That hasn't happened. He said he was going to give us 90 deals in 90 days. That hasn't happened, right? And what's happening is the world sees him now as weak and bumbling, like a Monty Python character, right, as I raised today, and not as a strong leader. And so no one is bending the knee to him. And so he's not achieving any of his international objectives, with one exception, which is that he continues to do everything he possibly can to bolster Vladimir Putin and to push Putin into a place of respect. The guy who's a genocidal maniac, one of the most evil figures in world history, right? And Donald Trump still started his day yesterday at the G7 by pushing the same thing that he talked about in all the G7 meetings that happened in his first term. But I want to just explain this because it gets to the sort of how gone he is, right? Like how he's no longer making sense when he speaks. Is that he said, Russia got kicked out of the G8 in 2014 because their invasion of Crimea, and if they had stayed in, there wouldn't have been a Ukraine war. But of course, the war began with the invasion of Crimea in 2014, right? Like, so even that sort of sequence of thoughts were outside of like rational thinking, right? Like he couldn't, just like he thought he was signing a trade agreement. When you sign a trade agreement with the UK, you're signing something with the European Union. I guess he didn't get the memo about Brexit, right? Like it was just like we're dealing with a level of incoherence, and bumbling buffoonery on the global stage that is dangerous and it's unacceptable. And I think that, whether he is sundowning and diminished, whether he's panicking and confused, whether they've overscheduled him and he's tired, right? He looked like he was a global embarrassment for the United States yesterday. And so in some ways it's great that he left early so he didn't continue to embarrass us on the global stage.
Do you think that there should be more of a conversation about the national security implications of all this? So you take the reporting from ProPublica about the intern in chief now who's ahead of counterterrorism for DHS, and you're seeing the performance that Trump just had during the G7 when the stakes couldn't be higher, and you're seeing Tulsi Gabbard's performance, Rubio, Hegseth. Should there be more of a focus on the national security implications and safety of all this?
Of course, right? I mean, the idea that the American military now is like moving away from protecting Europe and countering Russia and has now decided that the great enemy of the United States is 300 protesters in an LA suburb, right? It's an absurdity. And I think that what everyone has to realize is that, by the way, I'm enjoying this conversation. Thank you. Is that everyone has to realize that there is no version of the Trump vision of the world that makes us safer. There is no version because at the beginning of it is a severing of our ties with Europe. And our architecture, our security architecture for 80 years has been NATO, and that this protection that if we're attacked, the only time NATO invoked Article 5 was, after 9/11. They came rushing to our aid. They were there in Afghanistan and Iraq with us, right? Is that the idea that we were safe and secure because we had these European allies that would come to our aid if we got into war, we would do the same for them. And that's ended, right? We are now alone in the world. We can't trust, we don't know that the NATO that we all grew up with is still there any longer. Trump continues to degrade and mock our European allies. He has abandoned Ukraine in which is seen as an existential war in Europe. He continues to bend the knee to Putin. He continues to do everything he can to help China advance economically by vaporizing our all of our science and research in America. I mean, he is, and so yes, we are less safe today as a country than we've been in 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, 120 years, without any question. And we even got a new story today that apparently the internal working group inside the administration, the interagency working group set up to figure out how to put pressure on Russia to come to the negotiating table has been disbanded. And you see now series of things being done that would, as if Putin gave Trump a checklist, getting rid of USAID, attacking USIP, disabling our cybersecurity, efforts against the Russians, right? You see this series and litany of things that Trump has done that appears to be like a checklist that he received from Putin that he had to achieve. And so, yes, we are less safe today than we have been in generations, maybe going all the way back to the War of 1812 if we wanted to have like fun with the sort of history here. But it is, and it doesn't matter how much he puffs up, and playing around with the army over the weekend or the kind of the Marines being deployed. I mean, what a sign of weakness it is for the United States that we're needing to deploy Marines in Los Angeles. It's a sign of just unbelievable global weakness. And so, yes, the idea that Trump is making us less safe. He's making us poorer. He's disabling the most important parts of the things that have generated prosperity, our advantages in science and learning and research around the world. He's degrading our healthcare system. We're going to be far less healthy than we were before. All of this, I mean, the way I describe Trump's presidency is that it's an agenda of sabotage, plunder, and betrayal, and that we are coming out of this far weaker than we go in, which is why we have to continue to work with such urgency to mitigate the damage that is being done to the country.
Mm. Uh, I want to kind of end this conversation talking about the post 2020 election and where we are now. When I
Yeah,
was covering the post 2020 election, I saw all of these lawsuits covering them in Michigan, Minnesota, Georgia, Pennsylvania, all over the country. And it came clear to me early on Trump is going to lose. That Trump's efforts were ridiculous whenever they would trot out Rudy Giuliani to talk about a massive fraud and then go in court and Giuliani would say, this is not a fraud case. I counted 4 different Trump attorneys saying this is not a fraud case. And it occurred to me, this is one, a very dangerous moment for our democracy, and 2, Trump is going to lose. And even during January 6th, as appalling as that was, I knew that that attempt would fail early on. And one thing I do have to say, at the start of Trump's second term, it became less clear. It became that there was this dangerous moment for our democracy and that he was going outside the board, doing things that were stunningly undemocratic, anti-democratic, and I wasn't sure what the outcome was. So I want to, when we're talking about uh, the weakness of King, quote unquote, Donald here, how have you been, and the folks here, as someone who writes the Hopium Chronicles, do you have more hope seeing the outcome of these efforts, to see the hundreds of court rulings that have been blocking him and his response to those rulings, and the poll numbers? What gives you that
yeah.
hope, and where do you think this is going?
Listen, I think that we all have to recognize that we have no idea where this is going to go, right? But that if we don't put the pressure on, you can't score unless you shoot, right? If we don't put the pressure on Trump, then the outcomes that we want will never happen. And that's why we have to have 2 things in our mind at the same time, which is that there has to be this incredible urgency to our work because he's breaking things that will be difficult, if not impossible, to repair. But he's also at the same time stumbling and failing and buffoonish, and both of these things can be true simultaneously, right? And I think that what has happened, to your point, I mean, when I sort of look at the resilience that we have demonstrated, I mean, part of the theory of why it would be difficult to pull a 1933 Germany on the United States is that we've had this 250-year history of democracy, and that it's deep in our bones. And one of the things that people should be sanguine about is that the thing that has polled the worst of all the polling in the last couple of months, the single most unpopular thing that Trump has been tested is him disobeying court orders. It's polls in the teens repeatedly, right? Which is, really low in polling. I mean,
Right.
if you're under 40, it's low, and he's in the teens and low 20s on the disobeying court orders, which is why they're pretending to obey court orders, right? Which is
Right.
why there's this game, because they actually haven't listened to the Supreme Court. They haven't brought the people back from the Salvadoran Gulag, right? I mean, there are plenty of ways. And frankly, if you take a step back, and this is why I think some of the commentary about, well, we're at this constitutional crisis. We were at a constitutional crisis the day that they vaporized USAID. I mean, they were operating completely outside of law and the Constitution. Donald Trump has committed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of crimes. I mean, I think one of the areas where I feel like we have utterly failed as a movement is to attach the words of, the concept of criminality to what they've been doing, their abandonment of the constitutional order. Every day we get a ruling that says Trump violated the law or the administration violated the law. Well, and it's always in the passive voice, right? It's like the law was violated, as opposed to a human being violated the law and therefore is subject to criminal penalties, right? And we have done, it's why I have been promoting for months that Democrats should be making criminal referrals to Musk and Doge and to others in the administration and even though they won't get acted upon, we should be on record establishing that we believe that crimes are being committed, that laws are being broken, that Musk has committed more crimes than anyone who's lived in Washington in all of American history, right? And to attach criminality to all this, because we know the public actually cares about this, right? This has been established in polling, and it's not, people care more than about Medicaid cuts. There's this other stuff about preserving democracy. Of all the issues in the exit polls, the number one issue that people voted on was preservation of democracy, even more so than the economy in the exit polls from the election. So I think we have a lot more running room here in the center left to create rhetorical offensive engagement around all these issues. And yes, I think that where we should be pleased and happy is that even though the White House and Congress and the Republicans in Congress are acting as if the Constitution and rule of law doesn't exist, the courts have continued to deliver incredible victory after victory for our democracy. And I think what you're seeing is the circle of defiance of Trump is growing in the courts. I think you're seeing more ambitious rulings, more aggressive language. The ruling that came out yesterday on the NIH cuts was arguably rhetorically among the most significant in terms of indicting by a judge, a Reagan appointed judge, indicting the intent of the law breaking, right? Arguing this, I know we have to wrap up here, but it wasn't that it was innocent. It was that that they were expressing, racial animus in the
Right.
way that they were executing, using the power of the government and, appalling, right? I love these kinds of rulings because the judges are so measured. And I love it when they just let loose and just like start talking like a person, right? Like,
Right.
fuck you. This stuff was crazy. What are you doing? Right. And so I do think that, as others have written and you've written, is that judges are learning from each other and that case law is helping build upon sort of strengthening these cases and these rejections. But the reality is the reason why Trump continues to lose in the courts is they are operating as if the constitutional order does not exist and that there is no actual break or check on anything they're doing, that whether something is legal is unimportant to their decision making and whether they pursue, because I think they made a decision early on as part of the theory of Project 2025 is they would do 1,000 illegal things and they would get away with 100 of them, right?
Mhm.
And that they would take the 90% loss rate in order to get the 10% of the stuff through, because they were trying to change the nature of the regime and our government, right? And that this was on purpose. But I think the public opinion, I think foreign leaders, I think the courts, that there's been greater defiance of Trump than I think he anticipated. And it's why he's had to sort of push these panic buttons of the Marines on the street, the ridiculous military parade on my birthday, like something out of of a spoof movie, right? Like out of Monty Python, right? And because he's having narcissistic injury, that he's not achieving, that people aren't just, bending the knee to him, and that we aren't being compliant, and that there is incredible growing defiance to him. Now, at the same time, right, he continues to break things. And so we have to be able to operate with both of these things being true. And for those of you who have been covering the courts and helping explain all this stuff to us, there's no question that there are many heroes in the judicial system, that the judges, the people who brought the plaintiffs, who brought the suits, the lawyers who've made the cases. We are in a time of national emergency, and a lot of people have really stood up, and our democracy, I think, is proving to be more resilient than I think Trump anticipated. And that the lesson to all this is that we got to keep the pressure on 24/7 and keep fighting as hard as we possibly can.
I want to speak a little more about that court case because I was actually listening in virtually when that happened. It was Judge William Young, as you mentioned, a Reagan appointee, and he delivered that ruling from the bench. And it was a ruling against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And specifically, I wanted to point that out because what he said from the bench is that it was that he's never seen government racial discrimination like this in his 40 years on the bench. That was what he said. And he was indignant throughout the recitation of his ruling. He said it was palpably clear the discriminatory intent. And this was outrage directed at the NIH, directed at Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who he didn't mention by name, but he is the defendant here. He's the one supervising all this. And if we take a step back, the son of the civil rights icon, just yesterday, a federal judge has now said is behind the worst, essentially, government racial discrimination he's seen in 4 decades on the bench. We have a write-up of that story on All Rise News. If folks want to read the rest of the ruling, we have it there. Simon, thank you so much for everything here.
Well,
I agree with what you said a little earlier when we were talking about reasons to be hopeful. The resiliency of the institutions and the resiliency of the American people throughout this onslaught has really been amazing. And if you look at the New York Times keeps a running tally of rulings against Trump that either temporarily restrained or permanently restrained certain policies. We're going very, very high now. We're I think nearing 200. And just so people don't get desensitized to that, every one of those rulings needs to find, and one of the findings a judge must make is likely violation of the law or constitution. And so when that happens, just think about that. That's the standard likelihood of success on the merits when you're alleging some sort of illegal or unconstitutional action. I saw someone asking whether this video is going to be posted. Yes, I'm going to post it on All Rise News. If you subscribe, you can get a copy sent. And Simon, thank you for all of your work at the Hopium Chronicles, and that's where you can find all of his work. I hope to do this again sometime very soon.
Adam, I'm really grateful for all your work, and also, yeah, I mean, listen, the bottom line here is that what do they say? Rebellions are built on hope, right? And the old Star Wars line. But I mean, I think that it is really critical for everyone. If I can just end with this, is that we have to celebrate the wins when they come, right? Because I think it's so easy to see the world with the glass half empty, but you have to be open to understanding that we actually are growing stronger, that we are seeing tremendous resilience. The circle of defiance is growing. Yeah, but we all feel that it needs to happen faster, right? And with greater fortitude. I mean, all these things can be true at the same time. And it's just really important as you get up every day is not to exclude or diminish or downplay the significance of the victories, because they are many and they are serial and they are important. And I do want to say that I'm incredibly proud of being an American right now. I mean, I think that in a time, Americans, what do? We fighting for freedom and democracy is what we do. That's who we are, right? As Americans. And this generation of people are being called and they're answering. But, we also all know that we have a lot of work ahead of us. This is going to be a hard battle. It could go on for many years, and we got to steel ourselves. But the way that we succeed is by recognizing wins when they come and continuing to build on them. So,
Mm,
Adam, thanks for all your great work. Thanks, everybody. Keep up the fight.
thank you. And speak to you soon. Have a good day.
Take care.
Bye bye.